In the heart of an ancient forest, tucked away from the world, lay a remote wildlife sanctuary. The trees towered like sentinels, their branches thick and twisted with age. The air was damp, filled with the scent of moss, wet earth, and the whisper of unseen creatures that moved through the underbrush. The sound of distant birdsong filled the stillness, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the heavy footfall of a creature on the hunt. For days, the sanctuary had been quiet. There was an almost eerie stillness in the air, as if the animals themselves knew something was amiss. Even the usual chatter of birds seemed muted. The forest felt as though it were holding its breath. At the center of this wilderness, in a small secluded clearing, lived a lone kangaroo named Buster. He had been raised in the sanctuary from a young Joey, having been rescued after his family was lost to poachers. Over the years, he had grown strong and independent, learning to navigate the forest with ease. But recently, something had changed in the air. It wasn't just the silence, it was the growing unease, a sense that the balance of the sanctuary was shifting. Buster had always been fearless, bounding across the grassy hills with a confident stride. But that day, as he stood at the edge of the clearing, something felt wrong. He couldn't place it, but his instincts, honed through years of survival in the wild, told him to be cautious. He sniffed the air, his large ears twitching. There was a new scent on the wind, one that didn't belong. For hours, Buster paced restlessly around the clearing, watching the shadows grow longer as the sun dipped lower in the sky. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end, his powerful legs coiled like springs beneath him. The sanctuary, once his safe haven, now seemed like a trap. As twilight descended and the forest darkened, the sounds of the night creatures began to stir. The distant call of a fox echoed through the trees, the wind whispering like a voice in the distance. Buster's sharp eyes scanned the underbrush, the muscles in his legs tensing with each rustle. Then he heard it. A low growl, deep and guttural, rising from the shadows. Buster froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that sound all too well. A large figure emerged from the shadows, moving with a quiet, predatory grace. It was a dingo, its eyes gleaming with hunger, its fur matted and wild. The dingo sniffed the air, its gaze fixing on Buster, sizing him up as prey. There was no fear in its eyes, only the cold certainty of a hunter closing in. Buster's breath quickened. He had faced predators before, but never one so close, so daring. He could feel the pressure mounting, the primal fear clawing at his chest. But there was something else beneath the fear, something deeper, a flicker of survival instinct. Buster had learned to stand his ground, to fight for his life when necessary. The dingo took a slow step forward, its teeth glinting in the dim light, its body low to the ground. Buster's legs tensed. He had no weapons, no claws to slash or fangs to bite, but his legs were powerful, and he could leap higher than any predator could pounce. He darted to the side, bounding with all his strength, kicking up dirt and leaves as he moved. The dingo lunged, but Buster was faster, landing with a soft thud a few feet away. He pivoted, ready to make another move, but the dingo was relentless, circling him like a shadow, its eyes never leaving him. For what seemed like hours, Buster and the dingo danced around the clearing, Buster evading, leaping, darting with a speed and agility that only a kangaroo could possess. But the dingo was patient. It knew the territory better, it knew the patterns, and most importantly, it had time. Buster's strength was beginning to wane, the adrenaline starting to ebb from his veins. He had no plan, no strategy beyond survival. The forest had always been his ally, but now it felt like a maze that he couldn't escape. Then, just as the dingo closed the distance, something unexpected happened. The ground beneath Buster's feet trembled, and a deep rumbling sound echoed through the trees, louder than anything he had ever heard before. The dingo froze, its ears flicking in alarm. The ground continued to shake, and the trees around the clearing swayed dangerously. as if something enormous was moving through the forest. Out of the shadows emerged a massive creature, its silhouette dark against the dimming sky. A wild boar, larger than any Buster had ever seen, its tusks gleaming in the fading light, charged through the clearing. It was a force of nature, crashing through the underbrush with terrifying power. The dingo, momentarily distracted by the approaching boar, hesitated. Buster seized the opportunity, his legs propelling him forward in a single, explosive leap. He soared through the air, his powerful tail helping to stabilize him as he landed on the boar's back, just as it barreled past. For a moment, everything was chaos. The boar, wild with aggression, began thrashing, trying to throw Buster off. But Buster's instincts took over. He gripped tightly, his strong legs clinging to the boar's thick fur. The dingo, seeing the chaos, backed off, unwilling to engage with the boar. It growled one last time before disappearing into the shadows. Buster, heart racing, finally released his hold on the boar as it charged away into the forest. The massive animal disappeared into the night, leaving the clearing silent once more. Buster stood alone in the fading light, trembling with exhaustion and the lingering rush of adrenaline. The dingo had retreated, but the night was far from over. Buster knew that the balance of the sanctuary had shifted in ways that could no longer be ignored. The animals in the forest, once his fellow creatures in harmony, were now embroiled in a battle for survival. But in that moment, as the last vestiges of light faded from the sky, Buster realized something. He had stood his ground. He had faced the predator, fought back with everything he had, and emerged victorious. And though the night was dark and uncertain, he knew that courage was not the absence of fear, it was standing tall in the face of it, knowing that no matter what, he would not back down. The forest, once again, fell silent. But the echoes of Buster's courage would linger, carried on the wind as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, bravery could light the way. The moon crept higher in the sky, casting a pale silver light over the forest floor. The silence that followed the departure of the boar and the dingo felt heavy, almost suffocating. Buster stood in the clearing, his body still tense, his senses alert. He could feel the faint vibrations of the earth beneath him, the steady pulse of life that ran through the forest. The night had changed. There was a new energy now, a presence lurking in the shadows just beyond the reach of his keen eyesight. The wind shifted, carrying with it a new sense. Buster's ears twitched. It was a faint scent, but one he had learned to recognize over time. A human? The kangaroo's muscles tensed instinctively. Humans were not common in the sanctuary, but they were not unheard of either. There had been occasional rangers or wildlife experts passing through, but Buster had learned to avoid them. He didn't trust them. They were loud, unpredictable, and sometimes they brought danger with them. The scent grew stronger, carried on the breeze like a whisper. Someone or something was coming. Buster's heart pounded once more, but now, it wasn't just fear of the unknown. It was the instinct to survive. He had faced down predators before, but a human, with their strange movements and strange tools. That was a different kind of danger. His instincts told him to leave the clearing, to find shelter deeper in the forest. But something held him there, something that anchored him to this place. Was it the adrenaline still surging through his veins, or was it something deeper, inner pull to understand this new threat? He didn't know, but he could feel it in his bones. This wasn't just a predator. This was something else, something more. The human scent was unmistakable now, mingled with the faint traces of oil and metal. The forest felt heavier, its shadows deeper, as if it too was aware of the encroaching presence. Buster's eyes scanned the trees, trying to pierce the gloom, but the forest remained quiet. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting. The rustling began again, subtle, at first like the shifting of leaves. Then, the unmistakable sound of something heavy moving through the underbrush. Buster's pulse quickened. His strong legs were ready to spring, but he stayed still, watching, listening. There was no sign of the predator, but the feeling in the pit of his stomach only grew stronger. And then he saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows, silhouetted against the moonlight. A man. His movements were slow, deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. He was tall, wearing dark clothing, a hood pulled low over his face. The strange scent oil, metal and something foreign clung to him like a cloud. Buster's body stiffened, his muscles coiling, ready to move. But the man wasn't looking directly at him. He was scanning the clearing, his eyes sharp, alert, as if searching for something. Buster's mind raced. Was this the danger he'd sensed earlier? The strange presence in the air. What did the man want? The man stepped forward, crunching softly on the dry leaves underfoot. Buster took a breath, trying to steady himself. He had to decide. Now, he could bolt, he could hide, or he could face this strange, silent threat. But the more he watched the man, the more he understood. This wasn't a predator in the same way the dingo had been. The man moved with purpose, his gaze intent on something deeper within the forest. As Buster shifted slightly, his large tail brushing against the underbrush, the man froze. His head snapped to the side, his eyes narrowing in the darkness, as if hearing something only he could perceive. For a moment, the forest held its breath again. The wind stilled. The shadows seemed to grow longer, darker. And then, just as quickly, the man moved again, though his pace had quickened. He was heading directly toward Buster now. The kangaroo's instincts screamed at him to flee, but a flicker of curiosity kept him rooted to the spot. The man reached into a bag slung across his shoulder, pulling out a small object, something metallic, perhaps a device. He held it up to the sky, as if reading the stars or using some kind of tracker. Buster's eyes widened as he watched this strange human, unsure of what to make of this unfamiliar behavior. The man's gaze lingered in the distance, scanning the trees. It wasn't until he took another step forward that Buster realized what was happening. The human wasn't looking for him, he was looking for something else. A specific animal. Buster's heart skipped a beat as realization struck. The man was not an ordinary intruder. He was part of something larger, hunt, perhaps, or worse. A poacher with his sights set on something precious in the sanctuary. The quiet danger Buster had sensed in the air wasn't just about Hemet, was about the entire forest. The balance that had been disrupted was far more than just his fight with the dingo. It was a sign of a greater threat, one that was invisible, but undeniable. His legs coiled once more, prepared to flee into the trees. But as the man took another step forward, the air seemed to hum with tension. The ground beneath Buster trembled again, this time with a deeper force, as if the very earth was warning him. Before he could make his move, a loud, piercing screech ripped through the air, an owl, its wings slicing through the darkness. The man snapped his head toward the sound, distracted for just a moment. That was all it took. Buster leaped forward, his powerful legs sending him high into the air. He landed with a soft thud, silently darting into the dense underbrush, the world around him a blur of trees and shadows. The human shouted angrily, frustrated. But Buster didn't stop. He moved faster than he had ever moved before, his body propelled by fear and instinct. The forest closed in around him, the trees parting just enough to allow him to slip through. And just as the first rays of dawn began to peek over the horizon, Buster found himself back in the deeper heart of the sanctuary, far from the man and the danger he had sensed. The sounds of the forest were slowly returning, the birds singing their early morning songs, the wind rustling the leaves. Buster paused for a moment, his breath heavy, his heart still racing. He knew one thing for certain now. The sanctuary was no longer the safe haven it had once been. It was no longer just a place for animals to roam freely. Something was coming, something far worse than a dingo. And Buster, for all his strength and courage, would have to face it, just as he had faced every challenge before. The forest, it seemed, had its own plans, and it was up to him to protect it. The rising sun bathed the forest in soft amber hues. But the tranquility that the new day should have brought only seemed to deepen the unease within Buster. His pulse had slowed, but the weight of what he had sensed and what he had barely escaped lingered in the air. The forest, though now alive with the hum of morning activity, seemed somehow quieter, as if the trees themselves were waiting for something. Buster moved cautiously through the undergrowth, his eyes scanning every shadow, every rustling leaf. The familiar calls of the forest's inhabitants, the birds, the small mammals. The insects sounded like distant echoes now, muffled under the weight of the tension that had settled in. The kangaroo had always felt a deep connection to this place, the sanctuary, where he could roam free, but something had shifted. The delicate balance of his home had been disturbed. The man, his strange device, the threat of something greater than himself. His thoughts were interrupted by a faint, almost imperceptible sound, a low guttural growl. It was not from a dingo, nor any predator he knew. It was a strange sound, one that came from deep within the forest, far beyond the familiar borders he had always traversed. Buster froze, his body going still as his sharp ears honed in on the noise. It came again, a growl, then a snap of twigs. Something big, something dangerous, was moving in the shadows. The air had grown thick, humid even, as the morning fog still clung to the forest floor. Buster's fur stood on end. He recognized the instinctual feeling within himself, the one that told him to retreat. Yet he couldn't help but move forward, drawn by the mysterious presence that seemed to call to him from the depths of the woods. He moved silently through the trees, avoiding the brambles and fallen branches, his powerful legs carrying him swiftly despite the tangled ground. As he neared the source of the disturbance, the growls became clearer. They were closer now, louder, resonating in his chest. He crouched low, peering through the dense foliage. What he saw made his heart stop. A massive, shadowy figure loomed in the clearing ahead. At first, Buster thought it might be another dingo larger than usual, perhaps, or a different species altogether. But as the creature shifted, moving with a deliberate and almost predatory grace, it became clear that this was no ordinary animal. It was something else, something he had never seen before, something not native to the forest. The creature's body was hulking and muscular, covered in matted fur and scales that seemed to shimmer faintly under the moonlight that still lingered in the trees. Its eyes glowed faintly with an unnatural light, like two burning embers in the darkness. Its jaw was wide, filled with sharp teeth, and its claws massive, hooked, and black scraped the earth as it moved, sniffing the air like a bloodhound. Buster's blood ran cold. It was a predator, but not one from the forest. This creature was an intruder, something born of the unnatural forces that had begun to encroach on the sanctuary. A new terroran, unnatural abomination created perhaps by human hands. Buster's instincts screamed at him to turn and run, but his body felt rooted to the spot, his mind grappling with the realization of what he was witnessing. As the creature paced slowly through the clearing, Buster's eyes darted toward the far edge of the forest, where the first rays of sunlight were beginning to pierce the canopy. He knew he had little time. The creature would soon pick up his scent if he wasn't careful. The question now wasn't just how to escape, but what to do about this new threat. Suddenly the air shifted again, another presence. Faint. The man. Buster's breath caught in his throat. Was the man somehow connected to this? Was he the one who had brought this unnatural creature into the sanctuary? The man emerged from the shadows just as Buster began to move. He was close enough now that Buster could see the details more clearly. His dark clothes were torn, and there were faint streaks of mud and dried blood across his arms. The hood had fallen back, revealing his pale face, which was twisted with a strange mix of excitement and determination. But it was the device in his hands that caught Buster's attention. It was similar to the one the man had used earlier, the one that had tracked something. Now, it hummed with an eerie, unnatural energy, its glowing screen casting pale light across the trees. The man raised it, pointing it toward the creature. Buster's mind raced. The man had brought this creature into the sanctuary, but why? Was it a tool? A weapon? Or something more sinister? Was the creature under the man's control? The creature let out another low growl, its eyes narrowing as it focused on the man. There was a moment of stillness, a heavy silence that hung in the air as both man and beast regarded each other. Then, with an earth-shattering roar, the creature lunged forward, slashing with its claws in a flash of motion that Buster could scarcely track. The man's face twisted in fear, but he raised the device again, his voice lost in the chaos of the moment. He was shouting, trying to command the creature, but it didn't listen. The beast was a force of nature, its rage uncontainable. It roared again, swiping at the air, its claws raking through the trees like paper. Buster's heart pounded. The sanctuary was no longer just a place of peace, it was a battleground. He could feel it in his bones now. The creature was dangerous, but it wasn't invincible. There was a way to stop it, he just needed to act, quickly, before the man regained control. With no further hesitation, Buster sprang into action. He bounded through the underbrush, his powerful legs propelling him toward the scene. The creature was distracted for a split second, giving Buster the opening he needed. He leaped into the clearing, landing with a heavy thud just behind the creature. With a swift motion, he kicked out with his powerful hind legs, driving his feet into the creature's side with enough force to send it tumbling sideways. The creature howled in pain, momentarily disoriented. The man turned, his eyes widening in shock as he saw Buster standing firm between him and the beast. For a moment, everything was still. The creature glared at Buster, its glowing eyes burning with fury. But the kangaroo stood undeterred, his powerful muscles coiled, ready for the next move. The standoff felt endless, as if the forest itself had stopped breathing. And then, with a sudden, deafening roar, the creature charged again, this time straight at Buster. In that moment, everything in the sanctuary seemed to converge: the tension, the danger, the primal force of nature, all coming to a head in the heart of the forest. But Buster was ready. This time, he wouldn't just survive. He would fight.